One. Well, hey, Dave Melinda here, Positive Polarity Podcast. Hope things are going awesome for you this week. So excited to be hanging out with a great guest. And we're going to start with this question that is going to be like weird at first. So I'm just kind of pointing that out because it's a word that we really don't use that much, but we actually use the concept every day. So I want to ask the question to our guest and to the people listening right now. What is mindset? Okay. And what does it have to do with employee engagement? And there is a connection there. And I didn't see it at first, and I'm kind of really excited to unpack this topic today. So I'm honored to be hanging out with Traci Austin. How are you today?
I'm doing fantastic.
Awesome. You are the founder and chief talent officer at a company called Elevated Talent Consulting. So fill us in if you could on that, Traci. What is Elevated Talent Consulting? What's going on over there?
Yeah. So, what Elevated Talent Consulting is we serve organizations on ensuring that your employees are fulfilled in the work that they do while also ensuring that the organization is meeting its business results.
Wow. Well, everybody's fulfilled. So this is going to be a short show, right? Because
If
all
only, if
entrepreneurs,
only.
I don't,
When we look at
yeah,
turnover and engagement, right?
right. I don't know about you, but when I speak around the country on employee engagement, it's funny because, Gallup says that only 1 in 3 of our team are really engaged in their job. So I talk to people and I say, man, that means a team of 10, like 7 out of 10 people are not engaged. And I get so many people that come up to me after Traci and they're like, I don't know, all my team is engaged. So there must be one big company somewhere where nobody's engaged because all of those people are working for that company. I think it's a huge blind spot that companies have, that entrepreneurs have, that business owners have. And I'm just curious, do you kind of see that same thing when it comes to employee engagement?
So it's really interesting with employee engagement because I believe that it has to do with the level that we're at within the organization. What I will say is there's a lot of times lower level folks that are at line level, I find are not as engaged as others. And so, we really look at this and say why and where.
Okay.
Is the person in the right role? If not, they're not going to be engaged. Is their
Yeah,
leader leading them the way they need to be led? If not, they're not going to be engaged.
sure.
Are they on a team that's turning up their strengths or playing whack-a-mole on their weaknesses? And then the fourth one is their personal values aligned to the cultural values? And
Sure.
those four levers impact engagement. And I
Yeah,
think it's important that we also define engagement. And
sure.
like, what is that? Is that like I'm on my phone half the day? Is that I have a voice at work to really make an impact? Is that my brain is engaged in the work? And
Yeah.
I think that's where some of that comes from.
Sure. And I think that really is a great place to start is really properly defining some of these things because again, entrepreneurs that I talk to, again, either really don't understand what actual engagement is, and they just think maybe if they're sitting at their chair, typing, that must mean they're engaged. So again, I love that we start there. I also want to make sure that we understand and define mindset
Yes.
because that is a word that again we all have and we all work with every day, but I don't feel like it's really understood very well. So if you can help us, in your world, Traci, kind of unpack what that mindset is and what that looks like.
Yeah. So, how I define mindset is it's the thoughts that we have that become beliefs. And that belief then is that mindset or that operating system that we're operating from.
So good or bad? Is it a good or a bad? Is it neutral? I mean, how does that work? Because there are
Yeah.
people that are operating from I'll call it a negative spot, and then there are people that are operating from a positive spot. So do you look at it as good or bad, or how do you kind of define both ends of the spectrum?
Yeah. I guess I look at mindset is the mindset that you have serving the goal that you are looking to achieve in that outcome. And if it is not, then there's times where we need to shift our mindset. Or sometimes I'll say there's times where we have a thought error where what we're thinking is not
Yeah,
serving us to hit
sure.
that. So, one of the key mindsets, I'm going to give an example. Does that work for you, Dave?
Absolutely, for sure.
Yeah. So, one of the key mindsets that we believe wholeheartedly is that every complaint is just a poorly worded request.
Okay.
That mindset then shifts cultures, is what we have found. Because I don't know about you, but I'm in HR. I hear people complaining all day long.
Yeah.
And it can like pull me so far down and energy level so far down, all those things, right?
Sure.
Yet, if I if my mindset about complaints is that I just can't do anything about it. You notice the shoulder shrug and all the things, right? Oh, it's just
Yeah.
another complaint. Here we go.
Yep.
That's a mindset. But if
Okay.
my mindset is a complaint is just a poorly worded request, I'm immediately shifted into curiosity.
Hmm. Wow. So say that again. What define that? It's I already forgot. So oh hi D. I'm already on to the next thing. So what is it? It's a poorly worded request. A complaint in
Yeah,
is a poorly worded request.
yeah,
So like what's an example? Because I watched some of your videos and I know you were talking about, some different things there. I mean, if somebody's listening right now and they have somebody on their team that they're like, this place sucks. I don't know why I'm here. I
yeah.
don't like working here. I call in sick more than I show up. That's kind of what it manifests itself.
Sure.
How is how
100%.
is that a poorly worded request? Help me
Okay.
help me kind of bridge that gap there.
I love this question. So, do we want to use the example of this place sucks?
Yes, whatever, sure.
Okay.
That's well, for anybody. And we apologize if you don't like the word sucks, but deal with it. So go
Guess
ahead.
what? I grabbed it and we're running with it. All right.
We are.
So, if I'm the manager and I hear that, I'm going to go, okay, this place sucks. Well, that's your complaint. This place sucks. Can I do anything with that complaint?
Probably not, right?
The answer is no. So
Yeah.
the first step in identifying the issue of every complaint as a poorly worded request is to figure out what are the facts behind it. Like
Okay.
essentially we're figuring out what is the problem to be solved. I can't solve the problem, which is this place sucks, because quite honestly, I don't know what the problem is.
Yeah.
So I'm going to probably say to you, all right, Dave, help me understand. Why does this place suck?
Okay.
Okay.
Is
So
that's got to be hard though, right there? And I sorry to interrupt you on this, but I want to because I'm thinking about like real world when somebody's in that emotional state of this place sucks, their emotions are already pretty high, right?
for
And
sure.
and uh, and if I ask them like articulate that, help me understand what that means. What does that mean to you? Do you get a pretty emotional response, or do people start to really get more? In like some real world stuff we can fix. I'm just curious what your experience has
Yeah.
been there.
So there's a couple things here. Place, like where are we having this conversation has a huge impact, right? Is the person comfortable? Can we have the conversation, etc., right? So there's times where these can be hallway conversations and there's times where there's not. But the
Okay.
biggest impact here within this is I, as the leader, need to create the space for you where you feel like you can share that information back without judgment.
Okay.
If I ask that question of, well, why does this place suck? And I've already written it off and think that you're totally full of it, there's no way you're going to give me an answer.
Sure.
But if
Okay.
my attention is 100% on you and it's coming from that being of curiosity, and I'm going to be like, so Dave, I just heard you say this place sucks. I really want to understand. Tell me more about why this place sucks. More than likely, you're going to give me the life story of why the place sucks. I'm just listening at this
Yeah.
point because
Yeah.
I'm looking to figure out what is the real problem.
Sure. Wow. Well, and I think so the average person, when they say this place sucks, and then somebody asks them to articulate, especially if it's the owner of the business, you got to really practice not taking defense, not, deflecting, because as soon as they start listing these things out, I'm guessing our natural propensity as a business owner would be to try to justify each one, or to, deflect, or, rationalize that. So I think that's a really good spot there for an entrepreneur that's listening, is we have to just shut up and listen and allow that person to give that information. And I struggle with this thing in the back of my head as someone's talking. I'm already starting to formulate my next thought process, which means I'm really not listening. So I think that that's a really good, simple piece of a good, solid strategy, is really listen intently. And I'm just curious if, in your experience, in this case, Traci, have you found people that really struggle listening and they're just like, yeah, but, yeah, but, yeah, but type thing?
Yeah, for sure. So my top tip in this listening is listen for facts.
Okay.
Listen for facts. Okay, this place sucks, right? Okay, tell me why. Why does this place suck? Well, so and so never holds Jerry accountable, and I don't have XYZ tools that I need, and blah, 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 right? Give me five things, right? I'm
Yep.
listening for facts. The
Okay.
other thing I just did as the leader and the owner of the company is I didn't allow the individual to just say this place sucks and let it go and let
Okay.
it circle and circle and circle to create a negative culture, because it will. When
Okay.
we as leaders start to hold folks accountable for their complaints, what we're doing is we're shifting the responsibility from this place sucks, and they throw the ball on me as the business owner. And I say, well, tell me why it sucks. I just threw the ball right back at him and
Sure.
said, I'm willing to listen. But if you can't articulate why this place sucks,
Yeah.
we've got a different issue.
Right. Yep. Wow, that's cool. And I think so. I have a question, because I love the book from John Gordon called The No Complaining Rule. And he basically says you can complain about anything you want within your organization. You just need to have one or two solutions that are, you're able to articulate and share at that point. So I'm just curious, in your world, if I come to you and say, this place sucks, and I lay out some of these things, is the expectation for me to try to have some solutions, or is it enough for me just to be able to articulate and lay out what my problem is, and then maybe together you and I are going to try to solve these?
Yeah, so I look at this as collaboration. And what I have found in my 20 plus years is folks don't typically have a solution, and that's putting almost too much pressure on them. But
Okay.
if we can start to understand what the actual issue is, we can probably start to come up with solutions together. But the
Okay.
key here is when we hear the complaint, this place sucks, we get to the facts, John doesn't hold anyone accountable. I don't have the tools that I need to be successful, and I'm working too many hours. Three
Yeah.
complaints, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Can I solve those three complaints? Yeah, I think I
Can
can.
solve two, yeah, well, you can't solve the John problem, right? I mean, if he never works, how do you solve that one? I mean, how do you solve that piece?
Right. So the complaint, John doesn't hold anyone accountable.
Yeah.
At that, I would say back to you, Dave, thank you so much. Help me understand what you mean by John doesn't hold anyone accountable. And I'd
Okay.
start to get examples. And I'd say, can you help me understand what's the impact of John not holding Sarah accountable?
Yeah.
Well, it's putting XYZ on my plate, and now I've got, my workload is doubled. I'm being held accountable for these sales figures, but Sarah's getting the credit for it, on and on. Oh, that does sound like something that's really frustrating.
Sure.
So, what I'm hearing you say, Dave, about John not holding Sarah accountable is that your request is that we have a better definition of work for you and for Sarah, and that we don't have things floating back and forth. If this is the case, you notice that statement. If this is the case, because there's always three sides to a story.
Right. Well, and I think you started with something that we breezed right over, and this is making a huge assumption that this is being done in a safe environment. And I think without that safe environment, people aren't going to say anything. I remember in one of the companies that I owned, I could tell there was something going on, and there were 22 people on the team at the time. And I was like, all right, we're going to have a meeting. So we have a meeting. I'm like, all right, you guys, I sense some struggles, frustrations, blah, blah, blah. What's going on? And it was like absolute crickets, right? So I'm like, well, that didn't work. So I'm like, I got an idea. I'm going to bring in a third party and they're going to help me with this. So I bring in this guy, can't remember where or who. And I said, hey, to help us. And so the guy's like, what's going on? And again, crickets. Well, fortunately, this guy was smart enough to be like, hey, Dave, why don't you go answer the phone or make some coffee. And that door wasn't even closed yet, Traci, and they were just going like crazy. And again, we had an unsafe environment at the time. And so I'm assuming if the environment isn't safe, if I as an employee don't feel safe, I'm not going to really say much to you. I might say a bunch to my coworkers, hoping it kind of somehow gets to you, but I'm kind of scared. I mean, how do you create that safe environment? What have you learned in your experience?
Yeah. So first off, I 1000% agree. If we haven't, the buzzword right now, I don't love buzzwords, is psychological safety. If we
Yeah.
have not created that and built it upon trust, we're already in an upward battle within that. And so there's a couple kind of key things here for creating that safety. Is one is, knowing what's the outcome that we're looking towards. Can we both agree on this outcome? And so, that may be, something specific to that employee, that may be a work outcome, whatever that is.
Hmm.
And safety is based in trust. And so much of it is understanding where the trust got eroded. I
Yeah.
love, the five dysfunctions of a team,
Hmm.
that training because it really gets at how do we build that trust? And that trust is built through experiences. And
Yeah.
so if we're already in a situation where there is a lack of trust, there are times you absolutely need to bring in an outside person to understand it
Sure.
and, ask some of those questions. And accountability is a huge piece of this. If we're not holding folks accountable for it, guess what? That is going to continue to erode trust because I don't believe you are going to do what you say you're going to do.
And that's the basis of that bottom of the five dysfunctions. The number one is that lack of trust. And you
Correct.
can't really build off of that. And I remember going through that with a team, and we had to actually stop the training, stop the meeting because there was no trust there. And we're like, we can't even build on this if without that piece. So, and it's interesting the research that I found when I wrote my book was that the actual if people don't trust their leaders, the actual connection for engagement, the chances of them being engaged at work is like 1 in 12. And
Correct.
it goes to 1 in 6 if they are if they do have trust in that leadership, or 1 in 2, I'm sorry. So there's like a six-fold difference just purely on trust. So I think if you're listening today and you question if your team trusts you, that would be kind of like number one on my list, is find some ways to build that trust back, because disengagement happens. There's nothing positive that happens when a team doesn't trust its leaders, and vice
Correct.
versa. If a leader doesn't trust its team, it's pretty much over.
Right.
So,
And
and go ahead. Yeah, no, go ahead.
I'd love to go a level deeper on,
Yeah, for
kind of
sure.
this leadership piece
Yeah,
because what we know, I mean, if you look at all the research, I think it's 80 some percent of leaders have never been trained in leadership.
right.
Right? So they're a great doer. We promote them to being a leader, but we never give them any training. So, like the
Yeah,
example we just had of, John doesn't hold Sarah accountable. I'm going to say, hey, has John ever actually been taught how to lead and hold individuals accountable? The answer is
right,
probably no. And that, quite honestly, was the reason why we developed our leadership development program and
sure.
why we do the programs that we do, is because there wasn't those programs available that really got into How do we create a coaching mindset? How do we create presence with the folks we're talking to, which we talked about at the very beginning? How do we hold someone accountable while not putting blame or judgment on them?
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
and so within that, I find it's always quick to say this is a leader issue, this is a leader issue. I often find it's a training and accountability issue that's actually coming down from the
Right.
promotion process with new folks.
Yeah. Well, and so many people invest so much time on product training, on computer training, on all these programs. I mean, people are getting trained all the time. And it's funny when you ask them about leadership training, it's kind of like, hey, sometimes people went to the restroom and they got voted to be the leader when they weren't there. And I'm like, yeah, that's not going to end well. Congratulations. Or the old sales guy that crushes it in sales. Man, if he crushes it in sales, he's going to be a killer sales manager, and that couldn't be further from the truth. So at Elevated Talent Consulting, you do a lot of leadership training. Is it in person? Is it on Zoom? Is it both? How does that
Yeah.
work for you guys?
Yeah, it's such a great question. We offer both. So we actually have a in-person leadership development program starting in beginning of September for that's in person in Beloit. And then we offer about 6 virtual trainings per year. So we have one starting the end of September. What's unique about the trainings that we offer is that we combine the training with coaching. So each
Okay,
week you're getting training, but then you come back on Friday and we do a group coaching on what actually got implemented from the
sure.
training. So
Yeah,
we're building accountability into the training itself, which then allows the participants to see, oh, this is how I can actually hold my folks accountable because I just experienced it.
sure. Wow, that's cool. Hey, we're going to take a break, and when we come back, I want to like unpack your journey from an entrepreneur standpoint, because a lot of people listening right now, Traci, really are excited to learn about how they might be able to start their own business or not always work in corporate. So we're going to take a break, and we'll be right back. Welcome back. I'm honored to be hanging out with Traci Austin, founder and chief talent officer at Elevated Talent Consulting in the metropolis of Beloit, Wisconsin. I'm up in Waukesha, so about an hour north of you. It's awesome in the beginning of fall where it's still warm and all the trees haven't changed yet. So excited to see where this goes. But I just have a question about your entrepreneurial journey because, like I mentioned before the break, a lot of people listening, they have this desire to do what we do, own our own company. Some of it's purely like, I just want to lay out on the beach and do 2 hours of work a day on my laptop and be done because they think that's what we do. But there's also a ton of people that really have some value to add. They don't want to work for the man, whatever it is. So kind of walk us through that from your world. What did that journey look like for you?
Yeah, absolutely. It was one of those where I saw an opening in the market at the time and I just kind of went for it. Now, my business is completely different now than it was then, and we're seven and a
Sure.
half years old. And there's been many iterations of it. But what I will say for those budding entrepreneurs or those folks first in it, you have to have a passion for
Yeah,
what you're doing and for the people. If you're in it for the sales or for the time, those two things, money and time freedom, are phenomenal. However, it's going to take a minute in order to get there. And so my journey really was such trial and error to begin with. I was doing HR consulting for nonprofit organizations and really small organizations, which we still are
sure.
serving a lot of smaller organizations, but also larger within our training programs. But what I found over about the first 4 to 5 years is that the things we were doing, there was a very specific cadence and process to it. And I kept getting asked the same questions over and over. So it shifted into, well, let's just create a program around this. So I
Yeah.
created get this, a 52-week how to start your HR department from the ground up program with like 8 to 10 videos per week.
Oh my gosh.
Um,
Oh my gosh.
that
How'd
didn't
that go?
sell very well. However, what that did is it gave me the blueprint for the
Sure.
training programs that we have now. It gave me the
Yeah.
blueprint for like whenever I get any question from a client, they're like, well, how do you do this? And what's this template? And how do you do it? I'm like, here's a video, here's the template, go, right?
Sure.
And I'm sharing that with your audience to say there will be a lot of fits and starts of like, why did I just do this? I just
Yeah.
wasted 300 hours creating this thing and it didn't sell. Well, it set me up to do what I'm doing now. And it's a journey that's beautiful.
Sure, sure. So so prior to starting this, what did you do in corporate? What was your day job then?
Yeah, I was in HR, so in human resources. So I my career had been starting HR departments for the ground up within nonprofit organizations, and then I actually did some fun development and marketing work along with
Mm.
HR for a nonprofit. I then went into doing some consulting for a number of nursing homes in the area. And they said, hey, do you want to go get your nursing home administrator license? It's like,
Oh geez.
sure. No, wrong term at Albuquerque for me,
Oh
right?
no. Yeah,
And this is where I realized there that I was consulting within a CPA firm how important culture is.
sure.
And I didn't realize it until I didn't have a culture that fit me and my values. And neither one of them necessarily had bad cultures. It just wasn't aligned with me. And I
Yeah.
think that that's really, really important is especially for the entrepreneurs that are listening. What is the culture that you are consciously creating for your team?
Wow. Well, and I think this is where we need some help because I run into a lot of people in my world that are like, we don't have culture. And I'm like, okay, everybody's got, it's like water. There's no taste to water, right? So, but it's like everybody's got a culture. And so, I think that if can you explain that word? Can you unpack that for people? Because again, we've all heard it. It's like mindset. We've all heard that word, but I don't think a lot of small, especially small to medium-sized businesses, we don't spend a lot of time on creating a culture. Now we think about, maybe Microsoft and everybody on bean bags and watching this and doing that. We have this thought of what culture is, but in the especially in the trades where you come from and where you focus, what does culture look like? Because I feel like that's a misnomer. So help kind of clarify that for us if you
Yeah.
could.
So we define culture as the behaviors that you allow and don't allow in your work environment.
Gotcha.
So if we, really boil this down, we were talking about John not holding Sarah accountable. I'm like, did I
So
get the
yeah,
names
yep,
right? I
think
did.
so. Yep.
Yeah. So earlier we were talking about John not holding Sarah accountable. And we're talking about this mindset that every complaint is just a poorly worded request. Well, if I believe that culture is the environment based on the behaviors that I allow or don't allow, if I allow complaining to happen all the time, I'm going to have a culture that's full of complaints. If I train and work with my team to make requests and spend that time now, guess what? We're not allowing necessarily complaints to happen in the workplace because we've trained, and this takes a minute. I mean, we've trained to get to the requests, right?
Yeah,
If we look at accountability between John and Sarah, if I hear John's not holding Sarah accountable, I'm going to figure out why, and then I'm going to work with John on how to fix it. I'm not going to John punitively to begin with. I'm going to John to say, hey, help, what's going on? What's going on with
yeah,
Sarah? You
yeah.
know, because if we don't have those tough conversations to address the behaviors, we're going to have a culture that is typically unaccountable. It's full of complaints. We have mediocre performance and we have mediocre engagement.
Sure. So do you think Tracy, that HR is kind of the impetus for culture or the owner or leaders. Where do you see if somebody's listening right now and they really don't know what their culture is and they want to establish one, who's kind of who's the impetus? Who's the starter in this case? Is it
Yeah.
HR? Is it
No,
the leader? Is it
absolutely not.
everybody? I mean, is it all the above? I mean,
Yeah.
where do they start?
Yeah, it is absolutely not HR. It has to start with a leadership team,
Okay.
right? It has to start with a leadership team. Here's the deal. HR really doesn't have that much power, really, right? When you look at your C-suite and your business owner, they're setting the stage for what this is. Now, each leader that is holding their team of however many accountable, guess what? Do we have subcultures in organization? 1,000%. Who typically creates it and owns it? The leader of those people. Typically, HR's over here that has dotted line reports, but has very few direct reports. I mean, in the HR, they may, but they don't
Sure.
have direct reports necessarily.
Sure. Gotcha.
So culture is within the leaders that are there. Does HR pull things together? For sure, but they don't set it.
Yeah. Wow. And I think that you just pissed off a lot of people because they're like
Perfect.
wanting to, they wanted just to push it to HR. Let HR handle it, you know. They do, they got nothing else going, right? I mean, that's this misnomer. That's why I think it's fun. We talked about this before we jumped on. It's fun to, talk to various HR groups around the country because, they are under acknowledged. They are definitely struggling, and I think it's like the first place that people, it's kind of like marketing. When sales go down, hey, well, let's stop marketing or advertising. I mean, it's like this thought, hey, we don't need, if we got a downside, let's let somebody in HR go. I mean, they're just kind of like a luxury, and I feel that that's such a sad spot. But one of the other words is kind of like employee retention, and it kind of all mixes up into culture and all the things, the mindset things that we've been dealing with. So when you think about retention, this is again where I think a lot of leaders do this I'm not responsible type of thing. And it's just crazy because I don't know what your research shows, but like the last time I looked, it's like 3 out of 4 people quit because of their boss.
Mhm.
So it sure does have a lot to do with leadership. And I'm just curious if you're experiencing the same thing.
Yeah, so I mentioned kind of the four levers to engagement at the beginning, and these all impact retention. So, am I in the right role for me, fit to role,
Yeah.
based on my natural behaviors? You use DISC, we use something called predictive index, right? They're all
Yep.
fantastic and all have different
Yep.
things, but is that person in the right role for their natural behaviors is a really, really important conversation. And then is the leader leading me the way that I need to be led? You can see that really clearly in DISC, in many different assessments,
Sure.
because our leaders typically lead based on how they need to be led or how they've been taught to lead, which we've already talked about, like 10% of them have been taught
Right.
to lead, right? So, um, and then is the culture aligned to their personal values? And is the team, aligned to execute on the strategy that's needed there? And we've got the right people in the right seats.
Yeah.
So when we look at those four items, all four of them impact how engaged an employee is. Like I left 2 organizations because it was not a culture fit. I
Yeah.
stayed at organizations much longer than I probably would have because I had a leader that I learned a ton from and could perform really, really well under, and with. And so, I don't think it's just leader. I truly believe that it's all four of those.
Sure. So I have a question because and I wrote this down and I'm curious what your thoughts are. When you say something like, I left the organization because it wasn't a culture fit.
Hmm.
Now, I've interviewed a ton of people in my world. I'm sure you have as well. It feels that right there, and I'm going to just ask you your opinion. That feels like I'm kind of like shifting the blame onto them. And that seems like it would be like not well received in an interview spot. How do you like, I mean, how do you deal with that? Because
Yeah.
I would right now, I would be like, if you said that in an interview, I'd be like, oh my gosh, here we go.
Mhm.
Not my fault. It wasn't me. It was them. If they would do better, I'd still be there type thing. So how did you handle that personally for yourself? Because
Yeah.
that feels
Yeah.
like it would be an interesting thought.
Yeah. No, I think that that's a great question. And I also believe there's two things here with culture fit. Is one, are we interviewing for it? And it's something we do with all of our clients is we get really clear on the culture and we actually interview for it. And
Okay.
so, it was the blame on those employers as to why it wasn't a culture fit. No, it was much as much on me as it was there. And it was more about I didn't realize that it wasn't a fit going into it, and they didn't realize it wasn't a fit for me.
Mm, okay.
Why? There was
Yeah.
no interview questions around it, nor did I ask the questions at that point
Sure.
in time to
Okay.
ensure that it was a culture fit the other way.
Sure. Gotcha. Wow. Well, I like that. At least then it's as much and I think the comment just needs a little bit of explanation for people that are thinking that, because again, it can be taken in a negative light. But when you say, there's this fit, I feel like it's a language thing. If you get hired at a company and they don't speak English, you're not going to be there very long.
Correct.
That's
Correct.
similar to like, this isn't a fit for me. And especially if they didn't say, hey, you really need this language before we start, you know,
Right.
and I think was the onboarding for you in that spot, I'm guessing it was probably kind of weak because you might have picked it up in that first 90 days of onboarding. Do you think there was a connection there between weak onboarding and not understanding their culture?
I think yes, and the other thing that I think that there's expectations that we assume everyone realizes until
Okay.
we don't.
Okay.
And so, what I'd say for your listeners is as you're really looking at your onboarding, and looking at what those are, really start to pay attention to your stay interviews and your exit interviews. Are why somebody is leaving, are we super, super clear around what the expectations are upfront during the interview and the onboarding process, right?
Yeah.
Because if we're not and we don't set those expectations up front, we're going to have an issue. I'm going to give you a couple client examples because I think it'll be helpful to see. So,
Sure. For
a
sure.
lot of clients we work with, and ourselves included. So, like, I've gone through this with staff too, which is we're in a consulting environment. Therefore, billable hours is a big deal, right?
Right.
Like, billable hours is a big deal. And if we don't get really clear on what billable hours actually mean,
Yeah.
as aligned to what a budget is in an organization, like if I say, hey, coming in, you're going to be 75% billable. Well, that 75% billable means to me, you have to bill 30 hours a week. If you're not billing 30 hours a week, we're going to have an
Yeah.
issue. Well, if
Yeah.
you come back and say, well, I worked 60 hours a week, but I only billed 30, I'm going to go, the expectation is 30 hours billable. If you're working 60, then we have an issue potentially around how you're delivering what that is.
Yeah.
Or the flip side of that is they may bill 30 hours a week, yet the client had only agreed to and we were only budgeted for 15. We still have the
Right.
same issue. And
Sure.
that becomes a culture issue because we're paying very close attention to outputs and expectations versus maybe a relationship piece. And that's where this gets tricky and why I wanted to use a really clear example.
Sure, for sure. That's awesome. And again, another super good HR gem that you talked about is an exit interview. And it's funny, sometimes I get that deer in the headlights look when I ask a client or somebody that I just happen to run into and we get into a conversation. I'm like, have you ever done an exit interview? And they're like, what is that? And I'm just like, oh my gosh, that's like gold, because generally you're going to get, obviously, you got to watch how you do it, but you're going to get, for this place sucks, you're going to get, if that person ends up quitting, I feel like you get some really good intel number one, they want to get it off their chest. Number two, they got nothing to lose, so they're going to say
Right.
how they perceive it. And we always have to remember that their perception may not be your reality, but it's generally their reality. So we have to be careful there. But I'm assuming you're an advocate and a proponent of exit interviews whenever possible.
For sure. Yep. Exit interviews are very powerful. Stay interviews are even more powerful. So if you're not doing climate pulse checks or stay interviews with your current staff, you have the risk of losing them without taking that minute to figure out what's going on, right? And what I will say,
Is
I'm
that quite, just out of curiosity, I'm sorry to interrupt. Stay interview, is that like a performance review, or do you have a different, what do you, how do you
completely
define a
different.
stay interview? Okay,
Yeah, so a state interview is really a check-in with employees um, mid-year to kind of say, hey, what's going well, what's not going well, et cetera,
okay,
so that we can really hear what that feedback is. Now, we talked about trust earlier. So as a third party, I do a lot of climate surveys, stay interviews, exit interviews, et cetera. Why? Because of the trust factor.
sure.
In a lot of my large organizations, we anonymize that data, but
Mm,
roll it up to managers, right? So that
sure.
we can start to see trends to address the items and provide the training and the coaching to those leaders as to what's there. Because if we don't ask the questions, we're never going to know the answers.
Yeah. And that's the kiss of death right there for some entrepreneurs because they don't want to know the answer. And
Correct.
out of sight, out of mind. Hey, let's just not deal with it. That to me will kill a business. It's kind of like those words of, hey, that's just how we do it around here. Those are like these archaic thought processes, which again, a lot of people have, primarily, like you said, because they haven't been trained otherwise. But again, I think that a climate survey, stay interviews, those are just so powerful tools. And the thing is pretty much all we've been talking about as we start to land the plane today, Tracy. Everything we've been talking about is pretty much free. It doesn't cost a ton. Now, granted, PI or a disc or something, you might have to invest some money there. But the vast majority of stuff that you're talking about here, to get the person that says this place sucks, either get them out or work them and train them and mold them so that they say this place is awesome. A
Right.
lot of it doesn't cost a ton of money, and I think that's a big blind spot too, because I hear people, I don't want to invest in training, I don't want to invest in coaching, it's going to cost way too much. I'm like, man, it costs way more to not train somebody than it does to train them. And I'm
Oh,
just curious if
100%.
that's what your experience has found.
Yeah, 1,000%. And it's like the not training your new leaders and emerging leaders coming in.
Yeah,
If you start to look at turnover by manager, and I'd highly recommend go pull your data, you
yeah,
know, pull your data. What does turnover look like by manager? And again, this is not, kind of a witch hunt to go after a manager for something bad. It's to say, where
yeah,
do we need to focus our attention and up level our processes?
yeah,
The flip side of this, I will say, and this is, not a plug for you or I, but in the way it kind of is, in the fact that you and I have done what we've been doing for years and years and years. And, an entrepreneur or, a manager in there that's going to go try to take something on like this and run with it,
yeah,
you're going to run into issues and not get the data that you need. And there's
yeah,
times where outsourced is 1,000%
sure,
worth that for small snippets, or at least to
yeah,
train the trainer of how to do it.
yeah,
And, just kind of think about what that is.
yeah,
Yes, you can get the tools and templates in AI.
yeah,
However, it is the way you are being with the
right,
people. And I think that's kind of my hot tip is like, how
sure,
are you being with the folks that are across from you? And are you truly creating the presence where nothing else is going on other than them and they can
right.
truly be heard?
Yeah. Well, and I think you bring a great point up. We can go to Chat GBT, we can type something in and it's going to type out, 10 ideas for us, which is great. The issue now is the overworked leader has to implement that. And it's like, why bother when there are people like you and I to do that? It's kind of like, I don't know about you, but I have an accountant, I have an attorney, I don't have an insurance guy. I have no interest in learning any of that stuff at
Correct.
all, right?
Correct.
And it's like, why do we do that when it comes to our team? Why not find a coach or an HR specialist, whatever it is that you need, find somebody that can take and bring you to the next level. Because we would never consider representing ourselves in court. We would never consider, going to the IRS if we got audited without our CPA who's done all the work. We wouldn't do that. But yet we represent ourselves when it comes to our team, and it's just crazy to me, like you said, how much stuff is free, and we can help ourselves along the way rather than just do this. I don't have a culture or I don't have a problem type of blind spot that's out there. So we could talk about this all day. I got to let you go, but I got two more questions for you. Number one, what would your tip of the day be, Traci, for people listening? Maybe it's something that we covered. Maybe it's something that still is itching to get out from your innards. But what would your tip of the day be today?
Ask the question.
Okay. What's the
Yeah.
question?
Yeah. So, ask the question of your people, right? So, like, if you hear a complaint, ask about it. Tell me more about that. This place sucks. Tell me more about
Yeah.
that. Like, ask the question and get really curious about where that's coming from, because more than likely they will open up and start to reveal areas to you that are blind spots to you because you don't see them from where you sit.
Yeah. Well, and I think those are the best three words that you could use. Tell me more. When somebody asks you or gives you some information, I always think of the little piece above the water of the iceberg. You see the little piece, but what is that big piece down below? That's really what we want to know. This place sucks is that little chunk above the water. I want to know why that's going on, what's happening. And again, the best three words that I can come up with is exactly what you said. Tell me more. Because again, if they choose not to, then you have a different battle. But generally, people are, if they feel in a trusted organization, in a safe place, they're going to open up. And that's like the best gift you could give is really having somebody explain what's not working in your company. If you got a bunch of yes people, that's no good, because if everything's fine as it's like arranging the deck chairs on the Titanic, a lot of good that did. It was really not the right spot to be. So just ask the question. What a great concept. The last question, Traci, is if somebody's listening right now and this has kind of sparked something in them. They want to connect with you. They want to reach out and learn more about elevated talent consulting. What would be the best way for them to connect with you?
Yeah, absolutely. So we have something called our Tough Talk audit, which walks through kind of the framework we talked about today. I can give you that link for the show notes. Otherwise,
Okay.
you can connect with us on LinkedIn at Traci Austin. And then, of course, our website is elevatedtalentconsulting.com.
And it's Traci, Traci, so that you don't find the wrong Traci Austin. And again, put Wisconsin in there and see what you get, because I think that'll help narrow down the Traci Austins. But jump on that or jump on her website, elevatedtalentconsulting.com, and there's a bunch of fun stuff there. I looked around. It's a really valuable place to be. So Traci, thank you so much for this. We can now say, if this place still sucks, that we at least have gone through some of this today to try to help that particular person, whether that's you that thinks this place sucks or you're the leader that has that person on your team. But I think not doing anything is probably the worst thing you can do. Ask some questions, get inquisitive, and then again, if you're struggling, reach out to Traci. She'd love to help. So again, thanks for everything you're doing, and I love to learn from you. And you said you're not speaking much anymore as much, so I guess hopefully people listening will, if they want you to speak for them, will you do it at least out of a
Yeah,
favor for them?
absolutely.
Cool.
Absolutely. Yep. Well, definitely we've got some speaking and we've got some coaching programs. We've got one specifically for solopreneurs, but definitely the speaking. And we now I'm jealous, Dave. I'm going, maybe we shouldn't have, paused your podcast for right now, but we've got a podcast called the People
Oh,
Strategy Podcast. There's like
well, you can always have
215
season two,
episodes.
right? You can always have season
Yes,
two.
we may
So
have season two. So
there you go. Well,
amazing.
if you do resurrect the People Strategy podcast, I'd love to be a guest. But make sure again for the listener, you can for sure go and hear. There's 200 and some episodes. So if you enjoyed what we talked about today, jump on and listen to some of her past episodes and definitely glean some good HR information from somebody that's been in the trenches for 20 years. So again, thanks for hanging out, and we'll keep learning from you.
Thanks, Dave.